So no, I don't think, and God knows Mr. Smith knows, I admire him and respect him with the ability that he has. He has done a tremendous job in the position of a CFO. I've always said that. Not one time have I vacillated or backed up from that fact. But it's also a fact with me as an educator to want the best for the school system. And not one day would I want a surgeon in a math class trying to teach math. It just doesn't work, Mr. Marshall. And with the tenure time that Mr. Smith has served on the board without being certified or qualified, some people can say he's used Mr. Kilbert's staff. Well, why not just elevate them to the position that they should have been elevated to and allow him to continue to do the great work that he was doing in the position that he was in, and we continue moving forward? No, I'm not satisfied with this fiasco, because that's what I think. I didn't know it was coming up, and that's the first thing that I said that I was embarrassed about with this board. I am the only one on this board has sat for 9 years now and has tried to change the image of the Orleans Parish School Board with this public so that we could be a board that was about taking care of business of educating children first. It's not a race thing with me. Not at all, Mr. Smith, Mr. Marshall. And I think Mr. Smith knows that. It is just about me wanting what is best for the district, for the qualified people to move. Why put someone out of what the blessings of his or her educational background has brought them to? Why move them out of that? And you have people there that can do it. If we didn't have someone that was qualified, I would say, well, we need someone, so let's do it this way. But we have people that were qualified to do it. And when I speak now to the contract that was entered, that was heartbreaking to me to know that it was done. Though you would say that it would have probably come back before the board and passed, we'll do it the right way from the beginning for the integrity of this board that I've sat on for 9 years and wanted it to be what it is. Do it the right way, and we wouldn't be here today discussing this. But since we are, I'll say this. No, it was not done in the right manner. It should not have been done. So that caused me to have a hurt in my heart, as a distrust now in my CFO and acting interim superintendent, because it should not have happened like that. We have policies. These are things that people in the past was doing, and we got bad writings in the newspaper and all about. I don't want to go back to those days. And if we have people like that, I don't want them in leadership in the district. It's not necessary. So yeah, I speak now, and I said, I asked for his resignation because of that. So I make a substitute motion and say, not only is he not qualified to sit in the seat of an interim superintendent because of the act that he did to go and it not come before the board, he did not follow policy. What policies? I have policies that say A1, the board legal status. What does a board legal status? We only function as a board when we meet at regular board meetings. The power of the boards are delegated only as a board body. No authority is granted to members acting as individuals. That's policy A101. That's what I want to follow. I don't want to follow anything else. Policy A102, the authority. Members of the boards have authority only when acting as a board. When called legally into session, the board shall not be bound by any way, by any statement of action on the part of any individual board members, except when such statement or action is pursuant to specific instructions of the board. I don't want this policy A102 violated. This is to all of my board colleagues. So this is why I stand and say, no, let's not move forward with this. Now we reward Mr. Smith to say, well, he signed it, but now we'll just go back and ratify it and bring it forward, give him a new contract for the error of his ways. Is that the message that we want to send to our children? You steal, so we make you a present and say, well, I'm going to give it to you now, but now you know not to try and steal it again. No, this is not what I want to see for this board. So I stand not as someone trying to make an issue off of that or something to say that, oh, we could be trying to get a new superintendent. We are. But we have to still yet make hard decisions and take care of the business that is at hand. And the business is at hand is, was it done? Yes, he signed it. It was done. Was it ratified by the board? No, it never, ever came before the board. Ms. Padian's contract was the same way, yet the board would say hers is null and void, but because of Stan Smith sitting now in an interim superintendent's position, we turn around and say, well, we're going to nullify hers and she's not going to have a contract. There is not any legal grounds for an superintendent interim to have a contract. It is not so. They serve at the pleasure of the board, and he has been serving at the pleasure of the board for a whole year now. With him serving at the pleasure of the board as an interim superintendent, I've checked Attorney Seth Bloom. I've checked with the attorneys in Baton Rouge for the Louisiana School Board Association. There is none. You don't have to give a contract to an interim superintendent. They have no state statute to back it up. It is at the will of the board. So if this board chooses to award him with a contract now, I'd like to know this. He signed the contract. It increased his salary that went against board policy. What happens to the salary that he's been receiving for the last year that never was ratified by this board? What all happened to that? So we have real issues here that we should really had addressed in a private closed session, got it straight, move forward without all of this. I don't know what the issue is about Mr. Smith having to have a contract. He's still serving as the interim superintendent. Why do he need the contract? So with that being said, I'll say not only does he not need the contract because he's not qualified to serve, I put a substitute motion up and said that a substitute motion for his termination as the interim superintendent. I need a second on a motion.
Second. I'll second Ms. Cade's motion.
Okay, the motion, Ms. K, you're offering a substitute motion?
Yes, I open a substitute motion for the termination of Mr. Smith in the position as interim superintendent.
Okay.
And we can move forward immediately with putting someone that Mr. Nolan Marshall named that's in the district, so we don't lose step. We don't stop any time. We have Dr. Rosalind Dennis sitting right there who's now serving as an interim superintendent's position. She's doing the job, but she's not getting paid the salary.
Okay, we have a substitute motion to restate it again, please, Mrs. K.
So restate your motion.
I issued a substitute.
Point of order.
There was an amendment to the original motion on the floor from Mr. Marshall. So I don't know if you're advocating to vote on each one, but once you start voting on that one, then you have to vote on the next one. In the spirit of allowing everybody to speak.
That's
you
right,
may
Willie.
still want to speak. You may still want to speak, but once you start that, then we're going to have to vote on Mr. Marshall's.
That's right. So we
Mr.
can keep it.
Marshall's,
We can keep it in
amendment.
order. Thank you, Woody. We'll keep it in order. We have Mr. Marshall.
I don't, General Counsel, you need to speak on this. I don't think that we have to carry the amendment in order to
contract.
hear a substitute motion.
That's correct. You can hear the substitute motion and dispose of it.
All right, thank you. So it's been moved and second. Please, I'm sorry, Ms. Kay, please restate your substitute motion.
I enter a substitute motion that we terminate Mr. Smith as the interim superintendent, and we can replace him with the job that's already being done so we don't lose any time with Dr. Dennis, who's the chief academic officer of the district, but not being paid as an interim superintendent. She's already doing the job. She's been doing the job. She acted as the interim superintendent, if you will, in the absence of Mr. Kilbert whenever he would leave town. She always stepped up to the deputy superintendent's position, and she was one of the names that I named a year ago that we could have had, and it still would have been Mr. Smith as our CFO and Dr. Dennis as our interim superintendent. Thank you.
Okay, so your motion is to terminate interim superintendent Stan Smith, and part of your motion is to immediately appoint Dr. Rosalind Dennis as the new interim superintendent. Is that?
Yes. Who's already credentially certified and doing the job.
And is there a second on the motion?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Board members, your pleasure.
So
Okay,
moved.
let me say this. Mr. Marshall, there's an old biblical proverb that says, goes something like this: a man is presumed wise until he opens his mouth and remove all doubt. I listened to what you have read into the record. And a year ago, the white majority members of this board voted to elect and hire an unqualified individual as the interim superintendent who happens also to be white. Mrs. Cade and I were in dissent on that vote to hire an unqualified and uncertified interim superintendent. This was more than a year ago, Mr. Marshall. I don't know where you were. You mentioned in your own writings that Mr. Darrell Kilbert, while he was absent, he left two persons in charge. Mm-hmm. Dr. Rosalind Dennis, a PhD, in charge of academic affairs. And as Ms. Cade have stated, she has acted as superintendent in Mr. Kilbert's absence on many occasions. And you said the second person he left in charge was Stan Smith. Mr. Stan Smith was not left in charge. He continued in his job as the CFO. Mm-hmm. We didn't have two people in charge of the district. Dr. Rosalind Smith was in charge of the district in the absence of the superintendent. And this board, the prior board a year ago voted to elect Stan Smith, the CFO, over qualified people who have already served in the position as acting superintendent. Namely, as Ms. Cade have said, Dr. Rosalind Smith and as you, Dennis. So Dr. Rosalind Dennis, as you have stated in your own words here. You asked the question, does it make sense? Did it make sense to do what they did a year ago? But they did it. Was that in the best interest of our children a year ago? But they did it. Does it make sense to maintain that, Mr. Marshall? I submit to you, no, it doesn't make sense. I've outlined a whole scale of issues that have arisen since the appointment of Mr. Smith as the interim superintendent. The Times Picayune has said on several occasions that as president of the board, I should be working from a consensus. Well, there was a consensus to continue slavery in this country. But somebody challenged that consensus. There was a consensus to continue apartheid in South Africa, but somebody, namely Nelson Mandela, who spent 25 years in prison because he challenged that consensus. There was a consensus to continue Jim Crow laws in the South, but somebody challenged that consensus. There was a consensus that blacks should continue to ride on the rear of the bus. But one black female, tired from work, decided, I'm not having that today. I believe in working from a consensus, but there comes a time when you have to challenge the consensus. Mrs. Cade and I stood alone challenging the consensus not to hire an unqualified, uncertified individual as the superintendent of this school system. You, sir, are here today saying we should maintain that, giving credence to the notion that white is right. Ignore what is in front of you, Mr. Marshall. You've heard from your constituents in your district who are calling upon you to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Our community, just as it was reported in the Times Picayune, referencing Mr. Paul Vallis, who left us and went on to greater things, landed a job in Bridgeport, Connecticut, as the interim superintendent. And that school board voted to make him their permanent superintendent. And the citizens of Bridgeport took the school board to court. And the court ruled that the residents of the city of Bridgeport are entitled to have a properly credentialed superintendent. We deserve no less, Mr. Marshall, even on an interim basis. When someone is unqualified and have been in a job for more than a year, if not now, then when? Do your job as a responsible school board member. Okay, if there's no further discussion, we will call the question on Mrs. Cade's substitute motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no.
No.
Nay.
Can we get a roll call vote,
Roll
Mr.
call vote,
President?
please.
Mr. Ira Thomas,
No. I'm sorry, yes.
Ms. Leslie Ellison.
Yes.
Ms. Sarah Houston,
No.
Ms. Cynthia Cade,
Yes.
Mr. Seth Bloom,
No.
Mr. Woody Koppel,
No.
Mr. Nolan Marshall.
No.
Mr. President, you have 3 yeas, 4 nays, 0 absence, and 0 abstentions.
I have a question, Mr. President. I would like to amend Mr. Marshall's amendment.
Okay, wait,
Is that possible?
Yes, let me, Madam Secretary, would you read the vote?
Mr. Ira Thomas.
No, how many yeas?
Oh, I'm sorry. 3 yeas, 4 nays, 0 absence, and 0 abstentions.
Okay, so the measure fails. Now we go back to Mr. Marshall's amendment. And with that, Ms. Ellison, you had
I believe
something you
it
wanted
was
to say.
Mr. Hughes who stated that, we're proposing a contract here, and in the contract, we're tying the hands of our next superintendent by placing Mr. Smith back into that CFO position. And I believe that his points that he made he was on point with the statement that he made. So I want to amend Mr. Marshall's amendment to include this amendment, to delete under number 2 on page 2, where beginning as superintendent to his former position of CFO until October 31st, 2014, and all of that under that particular paragraph. Lines following that. So this is what I want to do. Amend it on page 2, number 2, delete superintendent to his former position of CFO until October 31st, 2014, or beyond, if extended by mutual agreement. The interim superintendent's salary will be reduced to $140,000, which is a part of Mr. Marshall's amendment, upon his return to the position of CFO, which shall commence at the first day of employment of the new superintendent, period. So I would like to add that particular deletion to his amendment.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
I'd like to say something with this.
We need to know whether or not there's a second first before we can.
Well, I think I've voiced my opinion here. I don't think that Mr.
Ms. Cade, I need a second
not
first
seconding.
before we
I'll
can
talk
discuss it. Is there a second? I'll second the motion. Now
May I speak?
Now you may speak.
Thank you so much. I'm speaking to the integrity of this board. That's to me that we're dealing with. The action item came from February, said that, and I'm reading it. Rationale. At the February 19, 2013 board meeting, the Orleans Parish School Board, under action item number 11, approved a motion by board member Seth Bloom, second by Sarah Houston, for the board president and vice president to correct the errors on the interim superintendent existing contract with general counsel and to bring them back for ratification. Now, if the contract never was ratified, according to policy, it never was ratified because it never came before the board. Now, the policies that I stated all before, it was about 5 or 6 policies that I stated. It never was ratified. According to policy A104, according to policy A103, according to policy A101, according to policy A102, according to policy B201. How many policies you want? According to policy B210, according to policy B215 and B217. These are the policies. All of these policies, Mr. Smith, this board is violating in order to keep you in an interim superintendent's position with a contract. These are board policies, Woody, Seth. This isn't anything Mr. Marshall, Ms. Houston, Ms. Cade made up. These are real board policies that we are violating. We're violating these policies. Now, when you say take a contract back, the original, that's what this said. This said brings the original contract back. The original contract was signed by Stan Smith and former President Thomas Robichaud. If it's null and void, how can you take this contract back, go correct it? It's null and void. It's never been ratified. So how can you bring it back before the board with corrections? What I would say is that a motion, if we're going to do this, should be put on the table to say, let the present board president with the vice president get with the attorney and draw up a contract for an interim superintendent. Another thing, if this contract was drawn up by Mr. Robichaud, the former board president, and it never came before the board, it wasn't ratified to the board, so the board didn't draw it up, Seth, you're an attorney. And it never came before the board.
Ms. Kidd, I appreciate you not referring to me by my first name and everyone else by Mr.
I said Mr. Seth. That's what I just said.
You didn't, but
I did say Mr. Seth. Well, I'll say Mr. Bloom, sir, because God knows I don't want anyone to call me anything but Miss Cade.
I know that.
Thank you.
That's why I said it.
So it's okay. It's okay, Mr. Bloom. So if this contract never was ratified, it cannot be corrected. So the motion should be to go back and let this present board president. Now we entering into something new dealing with board policy, because it's not board policy for a president to go without the consensus of a board and have a contract drawn up, even if he got a template from HR, because that's how it happened. It should have stayed with the board, and you all know that's the that's the policy way that it should have been done, but it never was done like that. So I put a motion now on the floor. If you're going to give Mr. Smith a contract, that you put a motion on the floor for the board president and vice president to get with our board counsel to go and have a contract drawn up that will come back before this board and actually be ratified. Not what I'm reading the action item to say, go back with the original contract and correct the errors. That's what this is saying. Have the president and the vice president to correct the errors on the interim superintendent's existing contract with general counsel and to bring the items back for ratification. You can't do them both. It's either a null and void contract that cannot be ratified, and now we get a new ratification.